Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Hope with Thinga podcast. My name is Crystal Cedino, and I am the Training and Development Manager for the Native Learning Center. Really thrilled that all of you are tuning in for another episode this week. With me today, I have my wonderful right-hand lady, Cora Anthony. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Cora.
Hello, everybody. I'm Cora Anthony, the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center.
Thank you. And then with us today, we actually have two special guests. I know Vince has been on the show previously, but we haven't seen him for a while on the show, so it's kind of cool to have him here. We have Vince Franco, who is the Compliance and Resource Development Director for the Native Learning Center. Go ahead and say hi and wave to our guests, Vince.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the introduction.
You're welcome. And then we have a very special guest on here who's actually never been on the show, but we're quite excited to have her here. We have Alyssa Loffler, who is the former grants writer for the Seminole Tribe of Florida. Go ahead and say hi, Alyssa. Wave to our participants or our listeners and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Alyssa Loffler. I've been a grant writer for over 20 years, and I was recently with the Seminole Tribe of Florida. I'm very proud to write their grants for the last few years.
And I will say this, Alyssa is also a certified grant professional, so she's a GPC.
And not just that, but aren't you an officer?
I'm the secretary for the Grants Professional Association for the South Florida chapter, and I've been a member more than 12 years.
That's amazing. I know that you've been an incredible resource for the Native Learning Center. You've helped Vince out quite a bit, and
Yes.
There's been a lot of communication and so on and so forth. So thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Awesome. All right, so today we're actually going to be discussing different grants and funding opportunities for tribal communities. So I know I say I'm excited for every episode, but I've been working with Vince to become more familiar with, OMB regulations and NAHASDA legislation and all this fun stuff that we do. And I'm sure those who are listening are like, fun? You find that fun or entertaining? And yes, I do find it fun and entertaining. But yeah, I'm excited to discuss today's topic. So let's go ahead and begin the conversation with the most basic part of the process. So Alyssa, how can a tribal community find new sources of funding? And what would you say is the first step they should know?
Well, good day, everyone. Prospect research is the first, and it's the most basic part of the grant research and the grant writing part. But that's after you've determined what your tribal goals are for funding. So you have to kind of meet with your leadership to understand what you're looking for besides just eligible tribal grants, because they're not all going to be a good fit for you. The next step is to take research, and you can be creative. I know a lot of tribes don't have a budget for buying directories, and there are a lot of free resources out there. Tribal communities can find funding if they're creative and with little or no budget. If you are applying for federal grants, the first step would to be sign on to a daily subscription of grants.gov, and they will send you the grants every single day. And you can go through there and click on the filter of either federal tribes, recognized tribes, or state tribes, or just look through the whole group. And you can also look through Federal Register, because they have a few funding opportunities on there for veterans, let's say, and also FTA, the Transit, and Department of Education. But in addition to the federal websites, you can also check with your program officers. And I would say the best resource is to check your BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs website. And they have ongoing grants that are available strictly to tribes. In addition to that, you've always got your Google search. And on Google search, you can put tribal nations, you can add tribal communities, and you'll get First Nation, and you'll have a whole list of available foundations that tribes can apply for. Another thing to look for is work with your current program officers, and they will let you know ahead of time generally when a grant is coming up. And this is grant season in the first quarter, generally till summer. So be prepared and be on the lookout. It's also good to have a calendar, if you can, from last year to kind of carry over. The grants don't always come out the same exact day. Sometimes it'll be a month before, a month after, but whatever you do, be prepared. I sign up for as many webinars as possible, especially with the recent COVID funding and the CARES and the CRISA and the ARPA. And now there's the White House, and you can sign on to the White House listserv and infrastructure and work with your leadership to be part of the tribal leader letters. And after a while, you'll get a little overlap, which is a good thing, which means you're not missing out on opportunities. But ask management to forward you any type of funding and get to know your local funders. USDA, for instance, they have local reps for your area, and there's usually more than one that will serve a region, and they're more than happy to share that information. And then they have newsletters for rural communities, which has a list of multiple opportunities. And if the funding agency has a tribal liaison, they're a great partner to get to know. So and don't forget Guidestar. Sign up for Guidestar. That is a free service to everybody. And you can check 990s, and you can see where the foundations fund and the amount and what the project is. So I always like to go to websites to see the past funding, to see the awards amount, and what their priorities are. So your computer is your friend, relationship building, and reaching out to your contacts. And if you have an opportunity to join a professional organization like the Grants Professionals, they also have regional conferences. I was looking around. There's one in North Florida that you can jump onto for $10. Some are $25, some are free. But if you're looking for the free ones, look for someone that's certified, either grant professional or NGMA. They also have local chapters as well throughout the country. So those are a few to get started with.
Awesome.
And Department of Interior, always keep an eye out for BIE and BIA. If I didn't say that, and Indian Health Services. Go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that's awesome because I didn't know about half of those resources. Like there's so many different platforms that you can get information. So thank you for sharing that with our listeners. So once they find these grants and these opportunities and whatnot, how can a tribe know that they've met the criteria for the grant that they wish to apply for? And what if they meet some but not all of the criteria? Should they still apply?
You're going to hear this answer a lot from me and from grant professionals. It depends. First and foremost, I check for eligibility. You want to check that tribal entities are eligible. And there are also NOFAs out there that are just open. And once you determine the eligibility, you have to still read through the NOFA, when I say NOFA, Notice of Funding Opportunity, or application or RFP. So I'll stick to NOFA, and sometimes they're asking for regional areas. So it could be a perfect fit, but they only serve a certain area. So tribes may be in multi-states. So think towards not only where your headquarters is located, but also where the services are going to be delivered. And that holds true for foundations. Check with your community foundation. They are a source for nonprofits, and so are your United Ways. They're there to help you. They really are. And you have to reach out to them sometimes because they don't know that you're there or who to reach out to. So make yourself available, reach out, network. It's free. It's a phone call. And the other thing too is if you reach out to your library, they have access to the foundation directory that you don't have to pay for. And if you decide that you want to use the foundation directory for even 1 or a couple months, you just pay for the subscription for a month or two, do all your research and set up your calendar. But a lot of that's available through the public library, and now you can even use those resources remotely. In addition to working with cities and counties that have what they call eCivis, and eCivis is the software platform that a lot of tribes use, but so do most municipalities. And they'll not only give you a list of grants, sometimes they'll even show you samples of funded opportunities. So check the eligibility, and if you're not sure completely, we've run into that quite a bit with HRSA and USDA. They have rural locator maps, and you have to put in the address of where the service delivery will be. So sometimes you think it's rural, but in their definition, it's not. So it's a good rule of thumb to reach out to the program contact on the grant opportunity or on the website and get it in writing whether you're eligible or not, so that you have that email and you can forward. And sometimes they'll give you an exception if your headquarters is located in an urban area, possibly, but your service deliver area is in a rural community.
Fantastic. And, you know, because we've had conversations with USDA before, Ted Bulow, who is I want to say is he a tribal response coordinator or something along those lines? And either way, he helps out tribes and he kind of like puts 2 and 2 together. But I do remember him mentioning that sometimes what happens too is you don't think you're eligible for the funding and you end up being eligible for the funding because of your location or whatever it may be. So like you mentioned, it's important to just kind of like ask and to see, to do that little bit of research and investigation to see, you know, if you can. So no, that's great. Thank you, Alyssa. So now that, you know, once we've identified an, you know, applicable source of funding, how does the writing process begin? And before you answer that, Ted Bulow is the Tribal Relations Team Lead and Tribal Coordinator. Thank you, Laura.
I was just going to say the same thing. Yeah.
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 Thank
Native
you.
American Coordinator, USDA.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. And they have regional coordinators in the areas.
Yeah.
And they can be your friend. I sometimes would receive multiple emails a day, and then they'll forward also the rural list of opportunities. And the other thing I wanted to add is that now with this administration, they're really reaching out to tribal communities, and they want us to get involved. They want us to be funded, and they're reaching out so that they can fill that void. And also it's geographic. Sometimes there's a gap where they're not getting project applications. So in the rural communities, that's also going to go towards your favor. But to answer your question, now that you've found your potential grants to apply for, what's your next step? Well, first and foremost, you sign up for a Native Learning Center training. Vince does an amazing.
I love that. Thanks for that plug, Alyssa.
Free. I have learned so much. I signed up especially for uniform guidance because they're always changing, and you have to keep learning. And that's what's so exciting about the grant world is it's not static. And I've been doing this for more than 20 years, and things have changed over the years, and uniform guidance changes every year, especially procurement. So keep up with that. And that's where the Federal Register, even though it's not the most exciting resource, it gives you the GSA updates. You know, the UEI has been changing now for a year and a half, but finally April 4th it did. And if you sign up for grants.gov, you'll get a newsletter subscription. So keep signing up for the DOJs, the big funding opportunities. And also, you'll find that some of the federal agencies also give you some type of grant training, a mini course. If anyone's applied for CTAS, they have a nice training that they offer. So does the ANA, the Health and Human Services. They offer free training if you sign up. And they'll teach you how to set up your performance measurements and your metrics and work with the community. But the basic things are internally, you need to find out what your priorities are, number one. And if you can, attend local or regional or online courses, especially with working remote. There's a lot of opportunities out there, and there's a lot of free trials, and organizations want you to learn more. And with the infrastructure, grant organizations nationally are offering information about how to get funded. And if you do have to reach out to hire a grant writer for these large grants, it might be something to look into, especially for the multi-million-dollar infrastructure, broadband, cybersecurity, roads, electric vehicles, and some of the grants, not all of them, but there's a few, FEMA, and some of the broadband, if you do get funded, might pay for a portion of it. So keep that in mind, that it could be affordable, or you could reach out to other tribes and work together as a consortium or a community. But to get started, you want to know what your project is. Who is it going to serve? How many people? What's your population? Be creative. If you're going to serve youth or STEM, look for opportunities that pay for that. Find out what you want to do. Where is your program going to be? Ask the basic who, what, where, how is it going to get done? Create your own work plan so that you're prepared when the grants come out, especially for the infrastructure, because once they come out, you may only have 4 to 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And if your internal review process is anything similar to what the Seminole Tribe is, it takes a good couple of weeks to go through the review process, plus you have to meet and plan. So if you have a work plan together and a budget, kind of an executive summary, that'll help you out. So number one, figure out what it is that is going to benefit your tribe the most. What does it take to create a successful plan? Who's going to be involved? Who's going to be your leadership? How are you going to measure? So you'll hear program measurements or metrics, they're all the same. What is your work plan? Define your need. Start your research now. You should probably already know what your need is in the community, regionally, within your state, and even nationally, especially in the tribal community, for the need for health services, mental health, and broadband. Nearly every tribe applied for broadband. And when you write, you have to motivate your reader. You have to tell your story. Let them know, persuade them to fund your project. Another important thing is keep in mind, how will you sustain it? How will you keep that project going? What makes your tribe the best tribe to fund? What is your organizational capacity? Now is not the time to be humble. This is where you brag and you tell them how many federal or big grants or local grants that you've had in the past and how successful you are. But most importantly, you have to read the application, read it, reread it, sometimes 3 to 5 times, and answer every single question specifically. Never, never, never go over the page limit. You don't want to have any kind of fatal flaws, and a fatal flaw would be a reason for them not to read your application. Number one would be not making the deadline. But if they tell you double spaced, Times Roman, use that. If they say 10 pages, only use 10 pages because they won't read past that. So again, follow directions. And if you need experience, try and find a mentor or a volunteer or work with someone. You will find that the grant community is extremely helpful and willing to answer your questions.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that. I think sometimes people get so overwhelmed with like, oh my God, the monster of the grant. And it's like, go back to basics. What are they telling you to submit, right? And focus on that. And I guess you, in your answer before, you kind of touched base a little bit and mentioned it there. Can you tell us just a little bit more in detail, what is the infrastructure bill? And then what like potential effect does this particular bill have on IT and cybersecurity, especially for tribes?
We've heard about the bipartisan infrastructure law, so they call it BIL, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA. This was signed by the Biden administration in November. There's going to be billions of dollars available. I saw BIA send out a press release to say that there's 466 million for tribes, and that's probably just allocations. Never before has the federal government made this type of funding available. And I repeat, I have never seen this type of funding available. And it may not be again for many, many years. So prepare now. Don't expect it to come again next year. Well, let me step back. It will be funding for the next 4 years, likely, but you may have to get your foot in the door now and start building those relationships with your local government, with the state. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be a subrecipient. The federal government does want to include rural organizations as well as tribes as sovereign communities. So right now, the electric vehicles has deadlines coming up. Reach out to your state, your Department of Transportation. They're building the corridors right now to find out where they exist and where they should. And if you can get your foot in the door now with the major organizations, reach out to them. They may be reaching out to you, but don't wait for them. Go ahead, be ahead of the curve. Let them know that you're interested. Let them know that you want this funding. And you don't necessarily have to be the lead. You know, you could be contracted for a certain part of it. You could be a subrecipient if your tribe works that way. There are lots of choices and opportunities, but stay ahead of the game and don't miss out on this. Roadways will be funded. We have well, infrastructure mostly for broadband is the biggest. And cybersecurity, public transportation, building up bridges and roads, clean energy, solar. I mean, it goes on and on. So whatever you're interested in, you may not need all of them, but look on the websites. You will see the infrastructure on all of the major transportation, definitely. So you may already have your foot in the door. You may already be a tribal transit recipient, but keep those lines of communications open with program officers, tribal consultants. Sign up for any kind of webinar that you can, and check out the tribal letter leaders. They will keep you in the loop. Some organizations are part of NAFOA for the finance area. So whatever it is, ask, don't be shy.
Fantastic, thank you. All right. Well, so with these types of funding, are there state deadlines? And if so, where can our participants find this information?
Well, every state is going to be different. So I would recommend that you reach out to your state for that particular funding opportunity, be it Department of Transportation for your state, Energy, Department of Energy, It could be the NTIA has $2 billion set aside for tribes for broadband infrastructure. They had 1 billion and they had so many grant applications that they're still reviewing them, and they have more money coming through. Some of it will be competitive, some of it will be allocations. A lot of this funding will go to the state first. So we'll have to work out those relationships at some point so that make sure that you do have your fair opportunity to get the funding that's deserved. There's another one called BEAD, B-E-A-D, which is also broadband, but it'll go through the state. So it's a combination of competitive formula set aside, what they call hard infrastructure, like brick and mortar projects and bridges, roadways, cyber, SCADA, clean energy technology, with the tribes are just way ahead of the rest of the country when it comes to clean energy. So it's a combination. There's a lot out there, so don't miss out on these opportunities.
Beautiful. And so you mentioned clean energy. I want to pick your brain a little bit about something we've kind of heard in different podcasts and whatnot, and it's like the environmental justice and the Justice 40 Accelerator. Can you share some insights into these initiatives and their benefits for tribal communities?
That's a great question, Cora. Environmental justice has been around for many years, but now you'll see it more and more as a requirement. In fact, I've seen grants from last year pulled back and rewritten to include environmental justice for the EPA, for instance, or Department of Transportation, to ensure an equitable distribution of grants across the board. So the definition that the EPA has is environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And equal decision-making processes. And if you're aware, some of the environments aren't as healthy, and the federal government, the state governments, even the local governments have not cleaned up the air or the water quality. And if you're familiar with brownfields, which was pretty new to me, but basically it's properties that are unsafe, that have been contaminated with oil spills and hazardous chemicals. And there are grants out there to clean them up and reduce those spills. And the Justice 40 Accelerator, that was signed by President Biden on January 27th of last year, 2021. Executive Order 14008, if you see that on a NOFA. And I would also include that in your response on your grants to show them. Sometimes on grants, you have to re-emphasize the question because the reviewers are reading a lot of grants, and you have to make it obvious, bold it, put it in bullets, say it twice if you need to, emphasize it at the beginning and at the end, that you are an underrepresented community. And if income is an issue, and I also want to mention, going back to eligibility, grants, some grants do have an income requirement, especially for HUD and CDBG funds and some of the health. So keep that in mind if that will help you on your applications, if you can show the income levels. But going back to Justice 40, it was created as a whole government effort that at least 40% of overall benefits from federal investments in climate and clean energy go to disadvantaged communities. So this will help tribes with climate resiliency and clean energy investments, and to make things affordable and sustainable in the future.
Awesome.
May I ask a quick question of you, Alyssa?
Of course.
You had mentioned a moment ago about something that I think is very, very important. And it's changed, and that's the UEI. If you could take a minute and explain in more detail how that transition occurred from the DUNS number to the UEI, what that means. It has changed. And I know there's a lot of tribes out there that are submitting reports as we speak, like we are at the Native Learning Center, submitting our IHP for the next fiscal year. And the UEI is in effect. But the forms that we're using do not allow us to fit in the new UEI number. So could you explain a little bit in more detail what that is and how it replaces the DUNS number and what that's all about?
Well, originally we all used DUNS numbers to identify our organizations, and some tribes and organizations had multiple DUNS numbers, and you want to consolidate those. But if you're going to apply for federal grants, you will have to have your grants office or your finance office will have to update the SAM's registration. And as of April 4th, we have grants in process that stopped and were changed because the requirements were changed on the SF 424s, which is a federalgrants.gov. No longer will you be identified by your DUNS number. The transition has taken place finally. You'll probably get all kinds of emails from all of your funders, DOJ, DOT, federal grants, and grants.gov. So in your applications, you are given a 13-digit odd letter capital combination of numbers and letters that will be your permanent identifier going henceforth instead of your DUNS number. So keep that available. I believe now you'll have to include that in your reporting guidelines as of April 4th. And there probably will be more training involved and reminders because not all the forms have been switched over. Some have been closed. I know the EDA had their grant process closed for a little while they transitioned and changed over. It's been in effect or in the process for multiple years, but now if you don't know it, ask your grant office or your finance officer what your UEI number is and memorize it, keep it with you because that's what you're going to be using for years now. And, put a sticky note on your computer in front of you, wherever it is, but that's your identifier.
That has replaced the DUNS number, right?
Correct. Yes. Yes.
And the DUNS number, if I'm not mistaken, expired every year. Is it your understanding that the UEI does not expire?
That is my understanding.
So once you get it, that is the number that follows your organization in perpetuity, basically.
That is my understanding at this point in time.
Okay. Okay. And you had mentioned sam.gov, right?
Right.
That is where the recipient of federal funding would go to sam.gov, correct? To find out or to check on this UEI number.
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
And also when you create a workspace, the UEI number has been populating, and that's how you do your search on the workspace by UEI number. Even before April 4th, it's been showing up as early as last year. So you could put both, but you could do a search by your UEI number of, grants submitted, grants in process. So yeah, that is your number to remember.
So it seems like grants.gov is moving right along. You've got the workspace on grants.gov that has updated to be able to accept the UEI, like you just said, where I think some of the tribes may run into some problems, and this is where they need to troubleshoot a little bit. Not all of the other forms have updated like grants.gov. I know that through the EPIC system that is used for submitting reports like the Indian Housing Plan and the APR, which is the end of the year annual report, that form through Epic does not show the new UEI number. Still has, and it's a fillable PDF, but it's programmed, if that's the right phrase, to only accept the DUNS number. So I think we're struggling with how to get that taken care of. And I think other tribes are struggling with, would be struggling with that very same question. You know, not every federal agency we're finding is up to speed like grants.gov and making that transition. So
Right.
just
And
wanted to
some,
get your take on that.
yeah, well, some have a two-step process. I know with the Department of Justice, you have to
Yeah.
apply through grants.gov and submit your SF 424, but we had a grant that now they're saying you may not need to do your lobbying. You know, you have to take it on a case by case, funder by funder, and it is possible. The federal government is not always on top of everything, and you know they have turnover as well, and they're trying to play catch up. So it's difficult for me to comment on each area of the reporting side of it because you know each department and area is a little bit different, but again, work with your program officer and ask them what, because they're probably still used to associating you with the DUNS number.
Yes.
But when you apply for a new grant, it's going to be the UEI.
Mm-hmm.
But imagine, you know, you still have your award numbers that will use as reference, which won't change.
Yeah.
So I would stick to that. I'm not sure that every report required a DUNS number or a UEI number in the past. Again, every agency can come up with their own reports. You know, some are more comprehensive than others, and some are kind of basic fill in the blank. So it's whatever works for them. You know, some just want numbers, you know, without too much narrative. You know.
Yeah, like the SF 424, which is purely a financial document.
Well, and a point of contact.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I was trying to unmute here and it froze up. But no, thank you. I feel like it's so important that everybody knows about these transitions and to be aware of any changes and whatnot, because then when you're applying and you run into these little hiccups and you're like, oh my God, what do I do? Who do I reach out to and whatnot? So thank you both for kind of bringing that into light. I don't have any more questions. Crystal, what about you? Do you have anything else for Alyssa?
No, just, thank you. Do you know if sam.gov has a mailing list as well?
Oh, I believe that the person that sets it up, the financial person, would probably get the mail from sam.gov. But it would, if you're on grants.gov, you will get that information. And grants.gov also has tutorials and YouTubes, and you can just plug in UEI number and you will get the GSA, the government. There's so much information now about what's going out there. And the same with the infrastructure bill. If you're looking for a particular type of grant, you can just look for infrastructure in roads and bridges, or go to your state and see what's out there. But going back to that question about the states, every state is different. I found that states are the most difficult to find grant funding because it's not always consistent, and it's not consistent by department. So it's really trying to get on a listserv if possible, or just keep checking the website, because sometimes they'll just pop up and they don't show up on grants.gov.
Right. Yeah, I've been noticing that. A lot of my research has been me perusing these websites and just seeing what's updated or new or whatnot. Like, for example, yesterday, the White House posted information on the infrastructure bill that they passed, and we're going to be doing something with that today. But Yeah, so, you know, and I didn't get an email, and I'm on that listserv. So I was like, well, good thing I, you know, just was like, oh, let me make it a point to, you know, like look into it and all of that. So yeah, no, definitely. Thank you for all the resources and, you know, places where our listeners can go to, you know, find all this information. Definitely appreciate you and being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm humbled that you asked me to be part of this great podcast, and you do a great job, and it's a wonderful opportunity to reach out to the tribal community and share information. Again, as I'll say, if you decide to join a professional organization with GPA, they have group memberships, but they also have what they call a grant zone blog. And we share information where people ask these questions. You know, what's happening with the UEI? How come this application hasn't changed yet? Or, you know, very specific questions, and you'll get answers from people like Lucy Morgan and some of your other presenters that have written the books on Bev Browning and the grant pros that have set the stage in the past 20, 30 years of creating the policies and the ethical policies. But whether you're a member or not, feel free to call a grant professional in your community, a grant writer, a NGMA for grant compliance questions. There are many resources that are available and that are free to everybody, and this administration is trying to help out with the tribal communities now. So as I said, I haven't seen it before. Jump on a tribal consultation. If you have challenges or issues, they ask for those questions. And if you can get your leaders to be on those calls or to submit written concerns, they're really trying not to provide or require matches going forward with tribal grants. But if they do require a match, even if it's 5, 10, or 25%, think about the leverage of how much more money you'll get with that 25% match. I mean, it's an investment.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you, Alyssa, and thank you, Vince, for joining us today. That does bring us to the end of today's episode. And thank you to our listeners. We really do hope you enjoyed today's episode. And as always, please make sure to come back for more content on the Hobothania podcast. Now, if you enjoy our show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and also visit our website, www.nativelearningcenter.com, for more information on upcoming webinars and virtual trainings. So thank you, everybody, and that is it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.